a Star Trek fan my entire life. Used to stand in line to catch all the movies on opening day. And I've been working on various Star Trek projects for pocketbooks for the last several years. It is, great fun and a huge nostalgia fest here. My not so guilty secret is I would be watching all these movies and buying all these videos and watching Wrath of Khan over and over again, even if I wasn't getting paid to be a professional Trekkie. No, it amuses me to no end that after growing up, watching the TV show, I now get to play with Kirk and Spock and all the other toys. I mean, I watched the original Star Trek when it aired on Friday nights at 10, back in the 60s. I have, seen pretty much every Star Trek movie the day it opened at the theater, and have stood in line in the pouring rain to see, the new Star Trek movies. So the fact that I actually get to, be a professional Trekkie and watch all this stuff for fun and write off my Star Trek videos as a tax expense, okay, is much fun.
Okay, when Wrath of Khan first came out, I had already been a Star Trek fan my whole life. I was born in 1964, which means that I'm kind of a second generation Star Trek fan. I really wasn't old enough when the series first ran in the 1960s to watch it and appreciate it and enjoy it. But later, when it was still running a lot in reruns and stuff in the 1970s, I can remember coming home from school and watching it. I remember when I was in high school, I used to make deals with myself that I wasn't allowed to sit and watch Star Trek at night unless I did all my homework first and stuff.
At one point, my editor, John Ordover, suggested, gosh, do you want to do the eugenics wars? Which someone needed to do a version of this because it had been established in official Star Trek lore that during the 1990s, Khan Noonien Singh tried to take over the world and with these ghastly eugenics wars. The problem, of course, being that 1996 had actually rolled around and Khan Noonien Singh was not on the cover of People magazine. So my mandate from pocketbooks was basically to go in and somehow shoehorn the eugenics wars into real history and somehow make the 20th century, according to Star Trek, match up with the 20th century that we had all lived through. Well, in my head, I approached this as a great big giant crossword puzzle, basically. I had all this list of Star Trek events and history according to Star Trek, not just Khan, but people like Gary Seven and Sean Christopher, Warder Lincoln. And Star Trek has done an amazing number of episodes telling us about the 20th century. And then I had this other list, which is real events, the Cold War, Reagan, Gorbachev, Bhopal, and how could I somehow connect the dots and explain how they all work. Well, fortunately, I'm not going to blow any surprises here because to a certain degree, we know Khan's life story. It's been established in I'm just sort of filling in the blanks between. We know that Khan rose to power during the 1990s, that he tried to conquer the world, that he ended up involved in sort of civil wars against other genetically engineered supermen, that they sort of fell upon each other and turned against each other, that following the defeat of the other genetically engineered supermen, Khan and about 100 of his followers escaped in the Botany Bay, which was a sleeper ship, spent 200 or 300 years in suspended animation, depending on which episode you watch, until finally being, picked up by the Enterprise and Space Seed. He's thawed out, tries to take over the Enterprise. Kirk defeats him. Kirk then drops him on CD Alpha 5, where he languishes for 20 years until along comes Chekhov in Wrath of Khan. And allows, Khan to escape from CD Alpha 5. He comes after Kirk for revenge.
Fire!
And Khan dies at the end of Wrath of Khan. So the broad strokes there are there. In terms of the books I'm writing, the first book takes Khan, which takes place, way before Space Seed, is the early days of the genetic engineering program which created Khan. It ends around 1984 or so, just as Khan's growing up. The second book is the Eugenics Wars, which is Khan fighting his various superpowered siblings. And again, no surprise, at the end of that book, Khan escapes Earth in the Botany Bay, right on schedule. And the third book will pick up after Space Seed and will cover Khan's years on CD Alpha 5. So the first two books are before Space Seed. The third book will be between Space Seed and Wrath of Khan. In this scene, which takes place shortly after the chemical disaster in Bhopal, India, the young Khan, still known as Noon, has an angry confrontation with Gary Seven. Khan is Ricardo Montalban. I write him, I describe him as, he looks like Ricardo Montalban. I've got him, you try to capture, Ricardo Montalban's voice when you're writing the book, Noon would not let Seven shirk his responsibility so easily. Do not lecture me, old man. I have seen the resources at your disposal, the astonishing technology at your command. You have the power to enforce your will anywhere in the world. He shook an accusing finger at the complacent middle-aged spy master. Even though Ricardo Montalban, in fact, does not have an Indian accent in the movie, and in fact, these dumb little loose ends. Whoever wrote the one-line dialogue in Space Seed that said that Khan was a Sikh was obviously unaware of the fact, or didn't care, that Sikhs can't shave their beards. And yet you let billions suffer while greedy corporations and weak, fallible, inferior men allow this planet to spin out of control. Men such as we, of superior intelligence and ability, have the power, the duty to bring order to the world. Okay, explain why it is if Khan is a Sikh, he's clean-shaven. Okay, Basically, Khan, being a supreme egotist, decided that the rules don't apply to him. So, Noon was a child's name, and after today, he was no longer a child. He had killed a man, only to see him rise up unscathed, and he had witnessed firsthand the murder, through unforgivable negligence and stupidity, of innumerable countrymen and their families. The more I read about Sikhism, Sikhs don't cut their beards. That's just intrinsic, but they told us Khan was a Sikh, and Khan doesn't have a beard. So I explained that in book 2. So all of this had changed him irrevocably. He realized with a sense of utter certainty. He was a man now, with a man's work ahead of him. Call me Khan, he said.
I think some of the attraction of the Kobayashi Maru scenario is the excitement. I mean, it's a very exciting opening sequence.
Engineering, damage report.
Main energizer hit, Captain.
As a Star Trek fan, when you went in to see the film and you don't know anything about what's going to happen, you're watching this first bit, people are dropping like flies, and you're going, what is going on? I think that makes a big impression on people's psyches. I think when you went to see the film for the first time, it's like post-traumatic stress syndrome, it imprinted it really hard. They use it throughout the film as kind of a touchstone, both for Saavik as an emerging officer and for Kirk as an older officer who is sort of at the other end of his career from her. And the specific phrase, I think a lot of what people react to is Kirk's particular claim, I don't believe in the no-win scenario. And then so much of the ending is that no-win scenario. We have the setup where Khan's got the bomb, we're damaged, we can't get away, and there's no way to win this except for sacrificing Spock. Which raises the question, did you win? Is the only way to really win a no-win scenario to lose in some other fashion? Or was that winning? And I think just the fact that it was, in the course of the story, it was tied in so beautifully plot-wise. It bracketed the plot so nicely and it wove into the plot so nicely, but then also emotionally. The fact that it had such emotional resonance with what we saw in the course of the film. And then you couple all of this with just the die-hard Star Trek fans' love of playing with the characters and exploring the characters. And I think it appeals to people for the same reason it appealed to me. It's a really fun intellectual game to think about what would this character do. And I think it appeals to the creativeness in Star Trek fans to think, what would I do? I think that's just attractive because Star Trek fans seem to like to play make-believe more than a lot of other fans do. This is actually from the short story that is Kirk's history of what he did on the Kobayashi Maru. And I liked this section because I think this sort of sums up both Kirk's attitude toward this and kind of gives you some information on the test. Okay, from Kobayashi Maru, we did Ice Trap and Death Count and Firestorm and Traitor Wins. In so many ways, the test was more complex than anything he could find in his history references. The computer knew everything, no matter how obscure or unlikely. Klingon reinforcements could arrive out of nowhere, no matter that the neutral zone never hosted more than 4 unreported Klingon cruisers. And we did the 3rd book in the Invasion saga, which was Time's Enemy, which was a Deep Space Nine book. We did Armageddon Sky for Deep Space Nine, which was the Day of Honor series. Kirk had piles of handwritten notes hidden under his mattress at the barracks, notes that sometimes resembled flowcharts more than battle plans. 12 times now he'd constructed winnable strategies to the Kobayashi Maru. 12 times he'd countered his own schemes by beefing up the computer's knowledge, increasing the Klingon forces. It was like trying to win a war against God. We did War Dragons for the original series, which was part of the Captain's Table series, because they do these little special mini-series now with the books. No matter what he conceived of, more Klingons could always converge, or simply not take damage, or fatally damage his own ship with weapons that shouldn't have penetrated the screens. Kirk was bound by the laws of physics, while nothing bound the computer but some programmer's sadistic imagination. We did Rough Trails for the New Earth series. Right now, we're working on a special 3-book series called The Janus Gate. Without the framework of reality within which to work, literally anything could happen. So Admiral Howell was right. Kirk would lose, every time. It's the nature of the game, and it wasn't fair.
Khan himself has never appeared again. They do occasionally talk about the eugenics wars and make a reference to, the battles against Khan or something. Mainly because the prohibition against genetic engineering, which was established after the eugenics wars, still carries through into the Federation of Deep Space Nine Voyager. And they've done some episodes involving genetic engineering, and invariably when everyone does genetic engineering on Star Trek, someone invokes the shadowy specter of Khan, While dealing with the eugenics wars era, tried to squeeze in as many other Star Trek characters as I could. Gary Seven, Roberta Lincoln, Gillian Taylor.
My name is Dr. Gillian Taylor, but you can call me Gillian.
Shannon O'Donnell, Dr. Carlson, Sean Christopher. All these obscure names of people who pop up here and there over the course of umpteen episodes of Star Trek, Next Generation, Deep Space Nine, Voyager, etc. Sean Christopher, for example, is the guy who we are told will be the first man on Saturn in 2007. Kirk met his father in an episode. We got an entire episode about Janeway's great-great-grandmother and what happened to her at the turn of the millennium. Well, she's in here. Okay, Gillian Taylor was the marine biologist who helped Kirk sell the whales. Roberta Lincoln and Gary Seven were like secret agent spies whom Kirk met during a time travel adventure. It all ties together.
I think I did get sort of caught up in the idea of being able to use the Kobayashi Maru as a scenario to reveal that kind of stuff about the characters. I tried in each of the segments that I do, in each of the stories that I do, I tried to alter what you saw of the test and what you saw before and after the test to sort of play with, how the characters, what you see about the characters, what they learn about themselves, what's revealed about them, in the course of it. And I didn't want to just do over and over and over again the scene we saw at the beginning of The Wrath of Khan, where we see the test, we see everybody get blown up, we see the character go, darn, I got blown up. Which is why, in the course of the stories, you see Kirk take the test multiple times, because we really stressed in the movie that he took it 3 times and he cheated.
We are surrounded.
You see Sulu take the test, but you see his story ends with him taking the test. There's a lot of stuff leading up to that.
teach me that sometime.
Chekhov's story actually starts after the test is all over, and you never actually see him take it, and it's all about the aftermath of the things involved.
No stress.
I have completed the assignment, Captain. A theoretical encouragement.
Yes, Mr. Chekhov, I can read, and as usual, your theoretical evaluations do not tally with mine. Return to your duty, and I'll let you know when your work is satisfactory.
And then Scotty's taking the test is kind of in the middle of the story. There's stuff in front of it, and there's stuff behind it. And I wanted to have that artistic interest of the stories just aren't formatted exactly the same way.
Well, let her rip.
One of the great funs of writing Star Trek at this point is you do have such a huge, vast universe to play with that's been built up over, my God, what, 35 years, that you'd be limiting yourself severely if you just confined yourself to just Classic Trek or just Deep Space Nine or whatever. In fact, my rule of thumb is never to invent an alien race or an alien planet if I can't just steal one from Star Trek somewhere.
There is no escape.
I could conceivably invent my own planet if I wanted to, but it's always more fun to drag in a race of aliens who are mentioned in 2 lines of dialogue in the neutral zone and bring them in, you know.
Well, Captain, Klingons call you a tin-plated, overbearing, swaggering dictator with delusions of godhood.
Is that all?
No, sir. They also compared you with a Danubian slime devil.
I see.
And then they said that you were...
I get the picture, Scotty.
Yes, sir.
There's like this whole open, empty space to fill. And I think I kind of ran with that a little bit in the book. You know, the idea that I could fill in gaps. I could make up things about what Kirk was like when he was in the academy and what happened to people before we actually saw them on the Enterprise.
The nice thing about the whole Star Trek universe now is after like 5 TV series, 10 movies, etc., you've got a huge, dense, rich history here. And as early as, in fact, the original show, they started establishing and trying to fill in. They were largely making it up as they were going along. History began with the original show. But at some point, we actually had to sort of try to, explore this rich, universe that has these sort of strange corners that are talked about and implied in episodes without actually being seen.
I think part of what was really exciting about The Wrath of Khan was it was one of the first efforts to sort of look at timeline. We're going back to something that we already know, which is Space Seed, which in and of itself kind of looked at timeline by being about this war that took place in the past. And it's one of the few places where we're really given a date, where we're told in 1999 the Botany Bay is launched with these guys, and this is after Khan has tried to take over the world. We've had the eugenics wars, we have names, we have the beginning of dates, we have this tantalizing hint about what was going on Earth in what was essentially still our future when the first episode was written in the 1960s, and is dramatically in Star Trek's past. And so The Wrath of Khan goes back to that and expounds on it. And in a lot of ways, what Star Trek writing had been about a lot was doing that, trying to find these little gaps and expounding on them.
I went back and, once again, looking for anything involving Star Trek that involved the 20th century. I watched Star Trek IV, The Voyage Home one day, and I actually went, oh my God, watching it, realized that, hey, Chekhov's tricorder and phaser are unaccounted for. He leaves them behind with the Navy.
Very sorry, but must be the radiation.
I actually thought I remembered that, went back, scrolled, there they are. He left them behind. So fine, a whole subplot in my book becomes whatever happened to Chekhov's phaser and tricorder, which end up at Roswell and Area 51, which ties in with more Trek continuity, and sets up something which is the whole problem of, okay, according to Star Trek lore, Khan left Earth in this incredibly high-tech spaceship in 1996. Where did he get a warp-powered spaceship back in 1996, since we don't have those anymore? Well, obviously, he stole it from Area 51, where they were building stuff based on Roswell technology, which is what happens in Book 2.
I think most fans are very clear about the fact that the books are not what we call canon. If in a book I say that somebody had a girlfriend, and in the movie they say that this person's gay and they never had a girlfriend, like that's going to happen, my book doesn't count. Only what's on film really counts. And yet at the same time, as authors, we try really hard to make sure we don't actively contradict each other as much as possible so that the reader can get sort of a feel of a coherent universe.
Nobody sat down in 1966 or 64 and laid out the entire history of the Federation. It's been built bits and pieces of a throwaway line of dialogue here. Well, as you know, Captain, Voyager 4, which fell into a black hole in 1999 and became Voyager, I've occasionally had fans, come and ask to me, like, where is the big book that says everything that ever happened in the Star Trek universe is? And it doesn't exist. It's being made up. And we just have to try to, make it all the pieces work. And the problem with Space Seed, at the time they wrote Space Seed, it was still, Star Trek took place in the future, but no one had decided exactly what century it was.
Very impressive.
It's since been sort of codified that, okay, Kirk's era was the 23rd century, which would have been 300 years after the 20th century, even though if you go back and look at Space Seed, the dialogue keeps saying 200, 200, 200. Well, that's because...
If somebody in a book says, here's this big explanation about where the Doomsday device that we saw in the original series came from.
And it is pursuing us.
And here's the aliens that made it, and here's the whole history. And it can be the coolest history you ever read. And if later in a movie they say, you know what, we want to revisit that, and we want to make up who the aliens were that made the Doomsday device, or whatever they do in the movie wins. And the book, it's like it never existed.
Inevitably, after 35 years of Star Trek, and there's something like 400 to 500 hours of Star Trek now, errors creep in, contradictions creep in. You can see people struggling to deal with this occasionally.
Captain, Ambassador Sarek and his wife are my parents.
Why did Klingons back in the old series look different than the Klingons in the modern TV series? Well, in an episode titled Trial and Tribulations, where Worf goes back in time and meets the old-time Klingons, someone asks Worf, well, how come you've got latex bumps in your head and they don't?
What happened? Some kind of genetic engineering? A viral mutation?
We do not discuss it with outsiders.
And that's the only explanation we've been given so far. Okay.
I think a big role that the novels played, especially in the barren wasteland of the 70s and stuff, Star Trek wasteland, was filling in this need that Star Trek fans had, both for more Star Trek, but also for backstory, for an idea of where did these people come from, almost from the time when Star Trek, really caught on, which, I mean, indeed it really did. Within 2 years it had a really loyal fan base, even when it was running, which is why the letter campaign at the end of the second season, was able to extend it for a third season. Fans were thinking about these things like, well, where did Kirk grow up? Did he grow up on a farm in Iowa, or did he grow up in the middle of the city? You know, what do we know about Uhura's past? Is she from Africa or whatever? And, you know, there was this rampant industry, so to speak. I mean, nobody was making any money on it, but in fan-generated fiction, you could go to Star Trek conventions, and there would be photocopies of stories people had written that, again, filled in the, I want more Star Trek, and I want to know more about these people. I don't want to just have another, and we have a battle with a Klingon book.
Yeah, the fans have always been very important for keeping Star Trek alive, especially, as I mentioned, during, you know, well, I think of it as Star Trek's years in the wilderness in between the original series and the first Star Trek movie. And, oh yeah, there's reams out there of Star Trek fan fiction from the very beginning, people writing their own books about Star Trek, doing strange things with characters, trying to flesh things out, building lots of sort of stuff which sort of becomes sort of assumed as canonical, which really isn't, you know.
I'll hear a Star Trek fan say something like, I can't believe I have to wait 2 months to get the next installment. And I just want to smack them. You know, you got reruns of the original, reruns of Next Generation, reruns of Deep Space Nine. Voyager just got done. Enterprise is still going. Movies galore on tape. Quit bitching. You know, it used to be that there was just nothing.
There are fans and there are fans, and, you know, there's the extreme lunatic fringe, which gets all the press. But no, there's lots of people who just, you know, Lord, I've got all this stuff memorized in my head, and when I'm old and gray, I'll still be able to tell you what planet, you know, Spock's girlfriend in Episode 5 came from, you know, and who played, you know, Khan's third sidekick, and, you know, kind of thing. Actually, I don't know, but actually, no, it was Judson Scott. In Wrath of Khan, Judson Scott plays Joachim, who is, in fact, Khan's second in command, and may or may not be his son. Okay. But yes, Judson Scott plays. I don't know who did it on Space Seed, but yes, it's Judson Scott in Wrath of Khan. Okay.